Rain pounded against the pavement, forming glistening puddles that reflected the dim glow of the street lights. The city felt colder at night, especially in the pouring rain where the warmth of the day had long since faded into a damp bone-chilling emptiness. Ryan pedaled his worn-out bicycle through the deserted streets, his hoodie soaked through, sticking uncomfortably to his skin. His shoes squelched with every push of the pedals. But he didn't care. This was normal. He had learned long ago that complaining didn't change anything. Tonight had been particularly rough. Deliveries had taken longer because of the rain, and a couple of customers had refused to tip, but at least he had made it through. At least he had one good thing waiting for him, a meal. As he pulled up outside the fast food restaurant where he worked, the manager handed him a small paper bag. "Good job, kid," the man grumbled, his voice tired. "Here, leftover meal. Don't say I never gave you anything." Ryan nodded, offering a grateful but weary smile. "Thanks." Clutching the bag, he hopped back onto his bike and headed toward his usual spot, a small bus stop with a half-broken bench and just enough of a roof to block some of the rain. By the time he reached it, his stomach was aching with hunger. He parked his bike, plopped down onto the bench, and carefully opened the bag. The smell of warm food hit him instantly, a burger and a small packet of fries. Not much, but to him it was everything. Just as he reached for the burger, a faint sound cut through the rain, a whimper. Ryan froze, his fingers tightening around the wrapper. It was barely audible over the storm, but it was there, a soft, weak cry coming from a nearby alleyway. He hesitated. It was late. He was exhausted, and it was probably just a stray cat or a pea of trash shifting in the wind. But then he heard it again. Ryan exhaled, rolling his eyes at his own conscience, then stood up, tucking the paper bag under his hoodie to protect it from the rain. Curiosity, or maybe something deeper, drove him forward. The alley was dark, the smell of damp concrete and discarded waste thick in the air. He squinted, adjusting to the dim light from a flickering street lamp. Then he saw it, a dog, a German shepherd, thin to the bone, its fur matted and drenched. It lay curled up against the brick wall, shivering violently, its ribs protruding through its soaked coat. Its ears were flattened, and its eyes, God, its eyes. Ryan had seen hunger before. He saw it in the mirror every morning, but this was different. Slowly he crouched down, the dog tensed, watching him cautiously, but too weak to move, too weak to run. Ryan glanced at the bag in his hands. He was starving. He hadn't eaten all day, but looking at the dog, he knew what real hunger looked like. Without a second thought, he unwrapped the burger, tore it in half, and carefully placed one piece on the ground in front of the dog. For a moment nothing happened. The dog just stared at it, then hesitantly it stretched its neck forward, sniffed the food, and devoured it in seconds. Ryan let out a soft chuckle. "Yeah," he murmured, breaking off another piece. "I know the feeling." He watched as the dog ate, its tail twitching slightly, the first sign of life he had seen in it. By the time the meal was gone, the rain had lessened to a light drizzle. The dog looked up at him, licking its nose, eyes a little brighter than before. Ryan sighed, shaking his head with a small smile. "Guess I'm not the only stray around here, ha." He didn't know it then, but that night under the dim city lights, with nothing but rain and a shared meal between them, something changed. The rain had finally stopped by the time Ryan got back to the orphanage that night, but the chill remained as he lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. His mind kept drifting back to the dog, that look in its eyes, the way it had devoured the food, the way it had just stared at him afterward, as if trying to say something. Ryan turned onto his side, pulling his blanket up around his shoulders. He knew he shouldn't care. It wasn't his problem, but he did. The next evening, after finishing his last delivery, Ryan rode back to the alley, his Stomach rumbled he hadn't eaten all day. But he didn't care, he just wanted to see if the dog had made it through the night. But when he got there, the alley was empty. The spot where the dog had been was nothing but damp pavement, no paw prints, no sign of it ever being there. Ryan's chest tightened. Maybe it had wandered off, maybe someone had chased it away, maybe it hadn't survived the night. With a heavy sigh, he turned back toward his bike, but then a movement in the corner of his eye. Down the street, barely visible in the dim light, a shadow moved between the buildings. Ryan narrowed his eyes. It was the dog. A small grin tugged at his lips as he hopped on his bike and pedaled toward it. But when he got closer, something strange happened. The dog didn't run. Instead, it watched him, then turned and started following Ryan. Slowed his bike, glancing over his shoulder. The dog was keeping its distance, but staying close. Its golden eyes locked onto him. "You following me, buddy?" Ryan muttered, half amused, half surprised. The dog didn't react, just kept moving like a silent shadow behind him. A shadow, Ryan smirked to himself. "Guess I'll call you Shadow then." And so Shadow followed him all the way back to the fast food joint. Ryan parked his bike and glanced down at him. "Stay here, okay?" Shadow sat, tilting his head slightly. Ryan took a deep breath and walked inside. His shift that night was rough. Deliveries were slow, customers were rude, and his stomach gnawed at him with hunger. By the time he clocked out, all he wanted to do was grab something cheap to eat and crash at the orphanage. But as soon as he stepped outside, Shadow was still there, sitting patiently in the shadows, watching, waiting. Something inside Ryan softened. He couldn't explain it, but for the first time in a long time he didn't feel so alone. He reached into his pocket, counting the small amount of change he had. It wasn't much. Instead of buying himself dinner, he went back inside and bought a small portion of grilled chicken. When he returned, he knelt down and placed the food in front of Shadow. "Here, it's not much, but it's better than nothing." Shadow sniffed at it, then carefully took a bite, not like a starving animal this time, but like he trusted the person giving it to him. Ryan smiled to himself, but the moment didn't last long. A voice cut through the night. Ryan flinched and turned to see his manager storming toward him, eyes blazing. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Ryan stood quickly. You were just feeding a mangy stray instead of working," the man snapped. "No wonder you've been late. First you start slacking, now you're wasting company food." "It's my money," Ryan muttered. The manager folded his arms. "I don't care. You show up late one more time and you're done. Got it?" Ryan clenched his jaw and nodded. The man scoffed, shaking his head before walking off. Ryan let out a shaky breath and looked back at Shadow, who had flattened his ears, sensing the tension. Ryan knelt beside him again, scratching behind his ear. "Don't worry, boy, I won't leave you." Later that night, after finishing work, Ryan went back to the alley to check on Shadow one last time before heading home. But when he turned the corner, his stomach dropped. A group of teenagers stood in the alley, laughing and throwing things at Shadow. The dog was pinned against the brick wall, dodging kicks and beer bottles. Ryan's blood ran cold. "Hey," he shouted, storming forward. "Leave him alone." The group turned. One of the older boys sneered. "What's it to you?" Ryan stepped between them and Shadow, his fists clenched. "He's not bothering you, just leave him be." One of the guys chuckled. "Look at this stray protecting a stray." Before Ryan could react, one of them shoved him hard. He stumbled back, landing on the wet pavement. Shadow let out a fierce snarl, stepping forward, his hackles raised. The teenagers hesitated. Ryan quickly got back on his feet and grabbed Shadow's collar. He didn't want to fight, he just wanted to get the out of there. "Come on, boy," he murmured. Shadow hesitated, but when Ryan pulled him away, he followed. The laughter of the group echoed behind them, but Ryan ignored it. As they stepped out of the alley, Ryan glanced down at Shadow, who looked up at him with those same grateful knowing eyes. Ryan exhaled. You really are a Shadow, huh? He murmured. Shadow just pressed his head against Ryan's leg as if saying, and I'm not leaving you either. The next morning Ryan arrived at work 5 minutes late again. He had tried his best, pedaling as fast as he could through the crowded streets, but he had stopped just for a moment to check on Shadow before heading in. It didn't matter that he had been working harder than anyone else. It didn't matter that he was exhausted or that his shoes were soaked through from last night's rain. The moment he stepped inside, his manager was already waiting. You're late, the man said flatly. Ryan swallowed hard. I got caught in traffic. It won't happen again, I swear, the manager sighed, rubbing his temples. Ryan, I've given you too many chances. I need reliable workers, not kids who show up when they feel like it. I need this job, Ryan pleaded. Please, just one more chance. The man shook his head. I'm sorry, but you're fired. Ryan's heart sank. He opened his mouth but no words came out. What could he say? He had no parents to beg for help, no backup plan, no savings, just a dog waiting for him outside without another word. Ryan turned and walked out. Shadow was still there, sitting patiently by the bike rack. The moment he saw Ryan's face, his ears perked, his tail giving a hopeful wag until he realized something was wrong. Ryan sighed, crouching down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. Guess it's just us now, huh? Shadow pressed his nose against Ryan's arm as if to say, I don't mind, but Ryan did. He rode back to the orphanage, the wheels of his bike slicing through puddles, his mind racing. What now? How was he going to eat? How was he going to keep Shadow safe? By the time he reached the orphanage gates, his stomach was twisting with anxiety. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe he could hide Shadow a little longer. He barely made it through the front door before the head caretaker spotted him. Ryan Parker, her sharp voice rang through the hall, making everyone stop and stare. Ryan froze, then he saw her gaze drop and he knew she had seen Shadow, who had quietly followed him inside. What is that? She snapped, pointing at the dog. Ryan stepped in front of Shadow instinctively. He's not hurting anyone, he said quickly. I swear he, you know the rules. She cut him off. No animals allowed. This is a home for children, not strays. Ryan clenched his jaw. Hewn, not a stray. The woman crossed her arms. Then take him back to wherever he belongs, because he's not staying here. Ryan's fingers tightened into fists. He doesn't have anywhere else to go. The caretaker's eyes narrowed. Then you have a choice, Ryan. The dog goes, or you do. Silent filled the hallway. Ryan's chest ached. Shadow was the only thing he had left. If he left him outside alone in this city, he wouldn't survive. His fingers curled into Shadow's damp, for he already knew his answer. Ryan lifted his chin, forcing himself to meet the caretaker's gaze. I choose him. A flicker of surprise crossed the woman's face. Then, with an exasperated sigh, she pointed at the door. Then get out. Ryan swallowed hard and nodded without looking back. He turned and walked out into the cold. Shadow following silently beside him. The wind had picked up, sharp and biting against Ryan's damp clothes. By the time they reached the edge of the neighborhood, his hands were shaking, not just from the cold, but from the reality of what had just happened. He had nothing. No home, no job, just a few crumpled bills in his pocket and a loyal dog who had no idea they had just lost everything. Ryan pulled his hoodie tighter around himself and glanced down at Shadow. The dog was watching him, waiting. Ryan let out a breath, trying to force a smile. Looks like we're really on our own now, huh? Shadow simply pressed against his side. Silent, steady, together they wandered through the dark streets, searching for somewhere, anywhere to stay. But as the night deepened and the cold grew sharper, Ryan began to wonder if they would make it through at all. The wind cut through the city streets, sharp And unrelenting Ryan pulled his hoodie tighter around himself, his breath visible in the freezing air, his stomach ached from hunger, his limbs numb from exhaustion. Shadow trotted beside him, his ears perked, always alert. They had been walking for hours, searching for somewhere, anywhere to take shelter. Ryan had considered the abandoned warehouse a few blocks away, but it was already filled with other homeless people. The park was out of the question too. Dangerous at night. He was running out of options. Then a scream. Ryan's head snapped up down the street. Under the glow of a flickering street light, a man struggled against two figures dressed in dark hoodies. A mugging. Ryan barely had time to think. He dropped his bike and ran. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the cold night. The thieves turned, startled. Ryan saw an older man, probably in his 60s, struggling to keep hold of his wallet. One of the muggers shoved him hard, sending him crashing onto the pavement. Rage flared in Ryan's chest. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, grabbing the nearest thief by the arm and yanking him back. The man cursed and swung at Ryan. He barely dodged in time, stumbling backward. But then a deep, menacing growl filled the air. Shadow, the dog, leapt between Ryan and the thieves, his teeth bared, hackles raised. His growl was low and dangerous, echoing through the empty street. The muggers hesitated, then Shadow lunged forward with a fierce bark. It was enough. The thieves turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Ryan let out a shaky breath and turned toward the man on the ground. He was clutching his chest, breathing heavily, his wallet still clutched in one hand. Ryan knelt beside him. "Are you okay, sir?" The man looked up, his expression a mix of shock and gratitude. "I think so." Ryan helped him sit up. Shadow stood beside them, still watching the street like a silent guardian. The man exhaled and finally met Ryan's gaze. "You saved me," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Ryan shrugged. "You looked like you needed help." The man studied him for a moment, then slowly he smiled. "Smil, my name is Michael Dawson," he said, "and I think you and I need to talk." Michael Dawson was not just any man. He was a well-known businessman, the owner of one of the city's largest security firms. But at that moment, sitting on the cold pavement, wiping the dust off his expensive coat, he wasn't just an old man who had been saved by a boy and his dog. Ryan helped him to his feet. "You sure you're okay?" Michael nodded, still catching his breath. "I should be asking you that, son. That was brave what you did." Ryan glanced at Shadow, who was still standing protectively beside him. "Wasn't just me." Shadow helped. Michael's eyes flickered to the dog and then widened in shock. Ryan frowned. "What?" Michael took a slow step forward. "That dog, where did you find him?" Ryan hesitated. "A few nights ago he was starving, so I gave him my food. He's been following me ever since." Michael knelt down, studying Shadow carefully. The dog watched him but didn't move, didn't growl, just stared as if trying to remember. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Michael said, "Hunter." Ryan blinked. What? Shadow stiffened, his ears twitched. His tail gave a single flick. Michael breath caught. "Oh my God," he murmured. "It is you." Ryan stared in confusion. "Wait, you know him?" Michael exhaled sharply and stood up. "This dog, he's not just a stray. He was mine." Ryan's heart skipped a beat. "Yours?" Michael nodded. "His name is Hunter. He was my family's protection dog. We had him since he was a puppy. 2 years ago he went missing during a robbery at my state. The thieves tried to take him, but he fought back. There was an accident and we never saw him again." Ryan looked down at Shadow. Hunter, who was now watching Michael with an expression Ryan had never seen before. Recognition. Michael's voice grew thick. "I thought he was gone. We searched for weeks. I never thought I'd see him again." Ryan swallowed hard. He knew what was coming next. Michael was going to take him. Of course he would. This was his dog, his family. Shadow Hunter belonged to him. Michael turned to Ryan, his face unreadable, then softly he asked, "But he won't leave you, will he?" Ryan's throat tightened. Shadow Hunter had a home, a real one that Ryan had never had, but even now, standing face to face with his former owner, he didn't move. He stayed by inside, loyal, unwavering. Michael watched them for a long moment, then suddenly he let out a quiet chuckle. "You two are something else," he murmured. Ryan braced himself for the inevitable, the request to give Shadow back instead. Michael smiled. "You saved my life tonight," he said, "and you saved his too, so I think it's only fair I return the favor." Ryan blinked. "What are you mean?" Michael placed a hand on his shoulder. "I mean, I want to help you, kid. Not just with a job, not just with money. I want to give you a home." Ryan's breath hitched. "A home?" Michael nodded. "I lost Hunter once. I'm not losing him again, and I don't think he's willing to lose you either." Ryan looked down at Shadow Hunter. The dog wagged his tail slightly, as if he had been waiting for Ryan to realize what he already knew. For the first time in his life, Ryan felt something unfamiliar: hope, a future, a home. The days of cold nights and empty stomachs felt like a distant memory. Ryan still had moments where he woke up expecting to be back on the streets, but every time he opened his eyes, he was in a Rayall bed, under a warm roof, in a house that felt like home. Michael had kept his word. Ryan now had a place to belong. He had clothes that weren't worn to threads, meals that weren't just scraps, and for the first time in years, he had a future. Michael had enrolled him in school, insisting that Ryan deserved the chance to chase his dreams. At first, Ryan had been hesitant. He had spent so long just trying to survive that thinking about the future felt for it, but slowly he started to believe in it, and through it all, Shadow never left his side. The dog, who had once been a starving stray, was now strong, well-fed, and truly happy. But no matter how much had changed, something stayed the same. Shadow still followed Ryan everywhere, still waited at the front door when he went to school, still curled up at his feet whenever he studied late into the night, because in the end, Shadow hadn't just found his way back to Michael, he had found his way home with Ryan. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and purple, Ryan sat on the front steps of the house, watching the first stars appear. Shadow lay beside him, his fur ruffling in the evening breeze, his ears twitching at the distant sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Ryan reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a sandwich. It was a simple meal, just peanut butter and jelly, but it made him smile because it reminded him of where it all began. Without a word, he tore the sandwich in half and placed a piece in front of Shadow. The dog looked up at him for a moment, then took the sandwich gently, just as he had that first rainy night in the alley. Ryan chuckled softly, rubbing Shadow's head. "Guess we've come a long way, huh?" Shadow wagged his tail, pressing his head against Ryan's arm. Ryan sighed, looking up at the night sky. For the first time in his life, he wasn't wondering where he'd sleep or how he'd survive another day. For the first time, he wasn't alone, and as he sat there with his best friend beside him and a future ahead of him, Ryan finally understood something. Kindness was never wasted. It always found its way back, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Ryan's story is proof that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. A single meal shared on a rainy night led to an unbreakable bond, a second chance, and a future filled with hope. Shadow was once just a stray, and Ryan was just a boy trying to survive, but together they found what they had always been searching for: a home, a family, and a reason to believe in something bigger than themselves, because kindness, no matter how small, always comes back in ways we never expect. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to Amazing paw stories for more incredible tales of loyalty, love, and second chances. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video to spread the message that compassion can change the world one paw at a time. See you in the next story.